What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Chris Hampton.
And this is Nate Drolet.
And today's episode is a patron episode, but we're also doing it with the plan that we're going to put this out on the regular podcast. Let the listeners know exactly what it is that the patrons are getting. They can sort of hear that format. And number one thing the patrons are not getting is the duos in the board meetings, because damn, I'm going to run out of duos eventually, and I can't just spread them out and spread myself that thin. So no duos on the patron episodes. Sorry. Hope that doesn't affect your willingness to become a patron.
I am not upset about it.
You don't have to be as on your toes in the intro to the podcast.
Yeah, somehow I forget it happens every time. Like, I'm just like, shit, we're still doing this.
I love that. I love it. And I just keep things going for way too long anyway, which is kind of the whole point of this conversation, actually. So before we jump into this, though, let me say, if you are interested in becoming a patron, you can do that at patreon.com/Power Company Podcast. You can also find the link right there in the show notes in your Pocket Supercomputers. And what that means essentially is you'll get at least 2 bonus episodes per month, sometimes more. Those episodes are often board meetings similar to this one, where we're discussing a topic, kind of wading our way through it. If there's some strange topic that's been on our minds, or something that's been bothering us about the direction training talk is going, or something like that, we'll often talk about it on these patron episodes. We also talk about our own training and what our own goals are. What's your favorite part about the kind of new format, the flow we've gotten into in these patron episodes, Nate?
I was actually just chatting with someone about this the other day, like, because this has also been new for us in the sense that we're recording remotely.
Yeah.
This has kind of turned into a fun time to catch up with you. Like, because it used to be we would kind of not see each other for, 1 to 2 months, something like that. And then we'd hang out and immediately just like word vomit on each other. Like, okay, I read this, like I've been thinking about this, which is always a ton of fun. And then, when the pandemic happened, we kind of lost that. And I was like kind of bummed. Like, I feel like it took us a while to sort of get that back. And so now it feels like we have that just in small increments now.
Yeah. And, for me, I'm a big, I want the sound to be right for these episodes. I think these conversations are important. And for me, I don't enjoy the remote conversations with most people, but you and I have talked enough and have had enough of these in-depth, long-form conversations where I feel like we can read each other's vocal inflections and understand when a thought is coming to an end. Mm-hmm. And it helps that we can see each other on video here while recording good audio. That platform didn't really exist. It was kind of a struggle in the beginning of the pandemic to figure out how to record with good audio, because over Zoom is just shit. Period. And I wasn't willing to go there. But this method that we're using is great. And I agree. I really enjoy just this like regular catch up time.
Yeah.
Instead of banging out like 10 board meetings in one night, ending up in some, either extra caffeine fueled all nighter or drunken stupor. So,
Or both sometimes.
Or both.
Sometimes it's just alternating episodes, whether it's more coffee or beer.
Yeah. So I agree. This has been great. So if you're interested in becoming a patron, check that out in your show notes. Today's episode is based on a blog post that you just wrote and will be coming out with this episode. And it's on knowing when to quit.
Yeah.
Talk to me about where that idea came from.
So this idea came from Seth Godin's book, The Dip. And I can't remember if it's a full chapter or if it's just, it might even just be a few short pages. And it doesn't fully even fit a whole lot with the rest of the book so much as it's like, it felt like this was an idea he really wanted to put out there.
Right.
And I thought it was great. So the idea behind it is typically with most things that we do, we either quit when things get hard, but before we should, or we stick with things way longer when we should have quit already. You know, it's kind of like the advice, buy low and sell high. Like it sounds great on paper, but our human emotions don't typically work that way.
Right.
You know, we
want to buy when everyone else is buying, and that's when things are highest.
Exactly. And like when price starts to, you know, plummet, you're like, oh no, I got to get out now.
Right.
So that's when we start to sell. Exactly. It's that same mentality for quitting too. And so he talks about how in business and just in all these different ventures in life, how we need to have a strategy around when we quit, because quitting can be useful. It can be a really great tool. I mean, there's a lot of things. It's like if you're doing something dumb that will never see benefit in the future, you should quit doing it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, quitting can be really helpful. And so it's important for us to learn when to quit and when not. And he uses this idea of a quitting strategy, which is basically set parameters for, okay, I need to achieve this by this time. And if I don't, I should consider quitting. Or I need to at least go this far into this, you know, down this path before I'm allowed to consider quitting. You kind of approach it from different angles. And I read this like 2 years ago and I immediately thought it was applicable to climbing. It's because there's so many times in climbing where, you know, we'll see it. People will try something and they're like, oh, this is just way too hard, but they just didn't give themselves a chance. And I'm guilty of this. Like I'm very guilty with sport climbs on this. Or they'll try something and they'll be like, I'm close. Just any second now, I'm here. I'm just going to keep with it. And like 4 seasons later, you know, they're still saying the same thing, where had they maybe stepped away, climbed a bunch of other things, they could have come back and done it in much less time.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part of it. You know, you're not giving up. You know, it's not like I'm going to quit attempting this thing for life. You know, it's more like I want to gain a tactical advantage in some way by quitting what I'm doing right now and doing something different that's going to aid me in that tactical position, you know? And it's interesting. I've seen more and more over the last year, climbing coaches and climbers in general, they'll like skip a grade or something. And that's like gives them license to say, forget the idea of the pyramid. That's a stupid idea. Just skip the grades, you know? And I think that is them taking the pyramid too literal and almost in a linear sense. Because sure, if you want to skip a grade and try something harder, you should absolutely do that. But there's going to come a point where it will be to your advantage to quit trying that thing for now and go back and do some lower grades. Fill in that pyramid. You might send a thing, then you might try another thing and have to quit it. You know, it's this constant repositioning and, you know, tactical jostling to get yourself to that higher place. It's a lot like chess, right? Like imagine trying to play chess without ever giving up a pawn. Like I don't want to sacrifice this pawn. That would be me quitting on that pawn.
Yeah.
You can't do it. You're going to have to make tactical sacrifices in order to gain the best position.
Yeah. And you can still have great lessons and great outcomes from quitting something. Like, even if you see something only halfway through, like let's say you start trying a route, you put in the time, and then for whatever reasons, you're like, I need to go do something else. You don't lose all the value you got from that. Like, you still learned,
Right.
still got a bunch of benefits. And, to me, I think one of the most powerful parts of creating a quitting strategy is the fact that you create it outside of the situation itself. So, we've all met like people who early in a season, they're like, okay, I'm just going to try this rock climb until either I do it or the season's over, and that's it. Well, halfway through the season, it starts getting really rainy and the route seeps. Like, do they quit then? They're like, if your only plan is to barge ahead until the end of time, you're not allowed to like stop then. Well, what if they start getting like an overusage injury? Like, they don't have a plan for that. And all of these little things. And the biggest problem is that because they didn't build a plan early on, now they're compromised. Like, they are so stressed over, oh, I really want to do this thing, but like, am I quitting early because I'm emotional and I think I can't do it? Am I holding myself back? Like, or am I only staying with it because I'm emotionally attached? Like, it's a sunk cost fallacy,
Right.
And that's the problem is in the moment you have so much tied up that making a good decision is incredibly hard. Like, I mean, as coaches, that's what we do for people most of the time. Like, we help them make these decisions by giving them an outside perspective.
Yeah, we kind of stand outside of that emotional turmoil that's happening and try to pull them outside of that emotional turmoil too, and say, hey, look at this logically. Let's think about it this way. That's certainly the majority of what we do.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same, like, for most people, it's why giving your friends great advice is really easy, even if you don't take that advice yourself. Like,
Yeah.
it's this outside perspective. You're like, yes, of course you should just be doing this, because you're not living it.
Something that I think is really interesting, a situation I ran into is, I think you have to have a certain amount of experience before you can make a good quitting strategy. And I think that experience almost has to be had by going too far, by banging your head against something for too long, by failing. You don't quit, but you do fail. I think that's where you have to go to learn, oh, here are the markers that along the way said I should have quit.
Yes.
I should have put this off until later, for whatever reason. And I see that often with climbers who are, either haven't really dug into tactics and invested time into something to see, oh, I actually can do this, or maybe this is still a little bit too hard, even though I thought it was possible. For instance, Waco a few years ago, Annalisa had seen me many, many times just go at a project. And even when the first few days of the project or first several sessions of the project look like there's no way he's going to be able to send this, I've done this enough times that I can understand how close I am on individual moves and what that means for the next link, for the send.
Yeah.
And she's seen me do that multiple times and then send a thing. And she wanted to try that for herself. So she tried a popular V7 in Waco, did all the moves over several days, but hadn't done them with much consistency. And it got to this point where she was starting to get frustrated and starting to get down on herself about it. And I finally had to say, which is, as I'm sure you can attest, and I'm sure most people will relate with, it is very hard to give this kind of advice to your significant other. Playing coach for your partner is often a very horrible idea.
You are not outside of the emotional turmoil as in the relationship coach. Like, you are still within the storm.
Definitely. I'm creating even more storm.
Yes.
You know, I'm bringing a thundercloud in. And I said to her, you're going to have to get lucky to do this.
Oh.
And she was like, what do you mean? You know? And I'm like, well, how many moves on it do you feel like you have to be lucky to do the individual move? Well, just these 2. And I'm like, we've only got a limited amount of time here. Are you going to be happy leaving here if you don't send this? And she's like, no. And I'm like, well, it might be time to hang it up. You know, this rock climb's not going anywhere. We can come back if this is still something you want to do. And she did hang it up. You know, we had some tough conversations. She had some tough conversations with herself, gave up on it for the time being, and ended up, you know, salvaging the end of her trip and having a really good trip. But it came down to the fact that she wasn't okay with walking away empty-handed, so to speak. Whereas oftentimes I am okay with that. Like, I don't feel disappointed when I walk away empty-handed. And empty-handed is the wrong term there, because I'm still learning. I'm still gaining a lot of things from it. So I don't see it as empty-handed, but she would have.
Yeah.
I don't recommend you do that with your partner, by the way.
I do not either.
Unless you've practiced this extensively.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a hard conversation to have. I mean, it's a hard conversation to have just with your climbing partner. Just being like, hey, man, this ain't it. Like, you know, you've been putting up a good fight, but yeah, like, you need to go do something else for a while.
Yeah. Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah. And it's...
Do you think there's another way, other than going too far a few times, to really understand what that process might look like? I see a lot of people surprised by sends, like, oh,
Yes.
wow, I can't believe I just put that together in 2 days. You know, after attempt number 1, I thought, I'll never do this.
You know, I think guidance helps. Having someone who is more experienced, who's been through these things, to just be like, hey, give it another go. You know, one quitting strategy that I love, that I use with my clients, my sport climbing clients all the time, and this is just kind of a little bite-sized one, is go up a sport climb twice. If you're project shopping, looking for a new hard project to do, go to the anchors twice before you pass any judgment on it. And that alone can go so far. Because, you know, what happens to people all the time, and man, even the people who already know what I'm going to say, like, they'll go out and they'll be like, I tried it. It's impossible. Doesn't go. Had to pull on quick draws. Didn't even go to the anchors. And my response is always like, okay, next time you go out, go to the anchors twice. Come back to me after you do. We'll talk about it. Every single time they have a different perspective. And, you know, now and then they're like, hey, like, this was a little too hard still. But even when that happens, they now know what they're dealing with. Like, and typically, like, I'm helping to give them suggestions of what to try. So normally it's within some sort of realm of reasonable. But sometimes we'll be like, you know what, this feels a little too powerful now, and I'm in good endurance shape, but I want to come back to this in the spring after bouldering over the winter. Things like that.
Yeah.
Where initially they were like dumb, stupid, impossible, you know?
Yeah. I think that guidance is really important. You know, I also see people in that situation that you're talking about. Like, I've given it a real chance. I'm starting to formulate an idea of what I might need to do this. I start to see patterns in some people, not all. Well, where they'll try a thing, it will feel hard, and the immediate answer is, I need more endurance. I need to go train more. I'm not ready for this.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the guidance comes in there too. Like, maybe your quitting strategy didn't have enough steps. Like, maybe you're bailing out too soon. It seems strategic, like you're making a good choice, but let's explore another choice and see if we can also add that to our quiver of, you know, good strategies to use.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. Like, another way I think you can develop this without having to go too far on either direction too many times is a lot of self-reflection. Like even years later, I look back a lot of times I'll think about projects and the amount of time it took me, or the things that went well or didn't go well. And with time and distance, I start seeing new patterns and I start being like, oh yeah, like that makes sense that this went well. I kept trying it, but I was also trying other boulders or things like that. Like continuing to reflect on these old lessons of both victorious and defeat, like that can be really helpful for continuing to kind of find this bracket of how long should I try before quitting and how soon is too soon to quit. Like, yeah. I think it's really important, no matter how limited your experience is, really try and reflect on that and see, hey, what went well, what went poorly, what could I have done better? What were maybe some times where I thought I should have quit? That's a huge one for me. There are plenty of times where, especially with routes, where I'm like, I don't know, I'm kind of over this. Like I don't really get nervous with bouldering, but with sport climbs, man, I definitely get that kind of performance jitters. And so it's so easy for me to kind of back off the throttle. And a lot of times I've had partners be like, hey, give it another go. Like don't even sweat it. Just give it another go, see what happens. And so knowing that about myself.
I've been talked into another go and had that be the send go.
Yeah.
Many times.
Yeah. So yeah, like thinking about those things, like for me, that's when I try and reflect on is like, okay, if I was climbing with this person, what would they say? Oh, they'd say, give it another go today, or things like that. And trying to work that into this idea of a quitting strategy.
Yeah, I think, one of the things I hear pretty often from clients, from people in general, is like one of the things we value, and there's definitely a zeitgeist that is happening, and a well-deserved zeitgeist of our time is really important,
Yeah.
And there's always this question of, am I wasting my time in trying this tactic, or will getting on this route again be wasting my time, or will hiking pads out to this boulder again be wasting my time? We're often really busy people, and time is really valuable. So there's always that question. And so when you're looking back, like you were just talking about, when you're reflecting on past successes, past failures, think about it in terms of, was this actually a waste of time? At the time, did I think it was a waste of time? And was that true? And it'll start to reframe your tactical approach to things. And you'll start to value these ideas that you might have seen as a waste of time previously. That's where I see a lot of people fail in tactics, is I say, oh, maybe you shouldn't start from the bottom again. Maybe you should, start from the middle and do the top. And very often the answer is, if I just start from the bottom, I might do it. I'll be wasting my time and energy if I start in the middle. And then they fall again in the middle, and I'm like, well, what was the waste? Was it that go, or was it the one I suggested that you didn't try?
Yeah, because you're a little more tired, and you still don't have that link done.
Yeah. So I think trying all these things, looking back at the things you've done in the past and framing it that way, will help you start to realize, oh, this can be valuable for my time if I actually do this thing, or if I quit this thing to go do this other thing.
Yeah. Tiny tangent, but because this is a patron episode, we do that.
Let's be real. We tangent all the time.
Yes, but it's allowable here. This is a space for it. It's a safe space for my tangents. So as far as tactics go, and in the terms of reflecting on tactics, one of my favorite things to think about is, let's say it takes me 12 days to send a sport climb. And, let's say since day 6, I'm like, oh, I'm just going to start going for red point goes. and it takes me, another 6 or 7 to do it. So it takes 12 days to send. Afterwards, when you've celebrated and all that, think about, okay, if I had to do this again, could I do it faster than in 12 days? Like what tactics, like if I knew 12 was the minimum using that method, what could I have done to do it better? And can you take this, apply it to a new route? Like if I go try another route, let's say I'm like, okay, 12C takes me 6 days normally. What would it take to do it in 4? Like suddenly, if you knew 6 would just be like, if I just keep ripping it from the ground, I'll do it in 6. What kind of tactics could you use on days 1 and 2, since you're not going to send on day 1 and 2 anyways? Like you already know that. What would you be willing to give up in the name of tactics?
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that approach. And I try to push that approach often, this idea of like speeding up our process. It's very easy to get comfortable in a process. Find your process for doing things. You can repeat that over and over and over. I top rope it twice, and then I go bolt to bolt twice. And then let's try to cut out one of the top ropes. Let's try to cut out both top ropes. Let's just go bolt to bolt once. Let's keep speeding up that process with each successive route or boulder or whatever it is. For instance, the boulder I'm working on right now is another tall, kind of scary boulder for me. And I just finished up one that was really scary for me. And I spent a lot of time on a rope learning. And I made a video about that. That's on the YouTube, Flight of the Antelope. And in this one that I'm doing now, I purposely, even though I wanted to go back up on a rope and learn some of the moves at the lip, I chose not to. And I was like, I'm just going to make the decision to not go back up on the rope where I'm comfortable. And I'm going to get a ladder instead. And I'm going to go up to that spot and I'm going to do it without the rope. And then I'm cutting out a step. I'm getting just as comfortable, maybe more comfortable, because I'm starting to learn, I can go for it up here, quicker. And then I'm speeding up my process. And there's going to be a stop to that. You can't speed it up infinitely, but I do think it's really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, I think it's important to recognize that, you're saying speed up, and some of these things might look like slowing down. They might look like extra steps initially,
right?
Like doing the links, like the fact that you're going up on a ladder and not just like going from the ground, things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talked about a quitting strategy you like to use for sport climbs. Do you have one you like to use for boulders?
Yeah.
Is it different?
Yeah. It's one of my favorite of all time. It's the 7-go rule. You're not allowed to. So for anyone who hasn't heard, the 7-go rule is when you go to try a really hard move, you have to try it 7 times without passing any judgment before you can really decide if it's too hard for you or not. And if you've made any process or any progress in those 7 goes, cool. Like maybe it's worth continuing to try. If not that day, just another day in the future. But if you made 0 progress in 7 goes, like didn't even make any more upward progress than your first time, you know what? Maybe it's a little too hard and you should walk away for now.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a smart way to look at things. One of my favorite rules as well. I use it for myself often. I use it for clients often. And 7 doesn't sound like a very big number.
No, but it feels like an eternity.
A lot of people won't go there, on their own.
Yeah.
I'm like, I get a video from a client, like, what should I do on this move? And I'm like, how many times did you try it? Twice. I'm like, well, then what you should do is try it 5 more times.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah.
And then if you make progress, start that clock again and try it 7 more times.
Yeah.
And eventually you're either going to make 7 attempts and not make any progress, or you're going to do the move and start that process over on a different move.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is something that I see experienced climbers have more trouble with than newer climbers. Like new climbers have no problem throwing themselves at the same move over and over. Like that's kind of what they do by default. But the more experienced we get, the more we think we know about our climbing.
Yeah.
You know, I know the moves I can do. I know the moves I can't do. I look at that move. I've tried it twice. I can't do that. Like, that's heinous.
Yeah.
But I don't really know that much more than like a beginner climber. If anything, I apparently know less because they would have kept trying it and probably stuck it at a proportional level. Like, I'm like, to me, the reason I preach the 7-go rule all the time is because I am so guilty of it that I need to just like start sharpening the number 7 on all of my shoes, my chalk bags, everything.
Because that's your next tattoo.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, just a giant number 7
on your neck.
Yes, 7. Exactly. Yeah, but it has to be backwards for a mirror. But yeah, it's you got to think about these things, right? Right? That's how throat tats work. But yeah, so that's like for bouldering, that's a little bite-sized quitting strategy. And so for everyone who's been hearing us talk about this idea and who may think it still seems a little vague, I'll give an example. And I wrote about this briefly in the blog post. But the first time I used this on a trip, so I was going climbing in Lander and I had just read this book and I was like, man, I want to use this quitting strategy. I told it to the idea of this strategy to like 2 people. Both of them thought it was awful. They were like, why would you play?
Yeah. Why would you quit?
Yeah.
You know,
like,
I don't quit.
Yeah.
If I'm going to try a thing, I'm going to do the thing.
Exactly. Like, why would you plan to quit? I'm like, okay, this is clearly a me thing. Like, I'm not communicating this well. I'm going to get some application and see if I can do better in the future. So I stopped telling people. And so I pulled out my diary and I started writing down all my checkpoints. I was going to go to Lander for, I think it was a 12-day trip, 10 or 12, something like that. And I wanted to try Rodeo Free Europe. And now in my heart of hearts, I really wanted to try the high road, which is you climb Rodeo Free Europe and you do a slightly harder extension. But step 1 lets you Rodeo Free Europe. I was going to have 8 climbing days, I think, something like that. So because I have plenty of experience with sport climbing, I knew roughly what I needed to do for each day to be able to hopefully have success on this. Now, this is a short route, like the hard bits of it are maybe 35 feet total, like right off the ground to the 35-foot mark, probably 12A from there to the top, which is another 20 feet. So it's still tiny. Yeah. And that's a challenging style for me. I don't have a ton of experience at it. And this is a 14A, and all of my ascents -1 of 14A plus have all been, 100 feet typically. Like I have one route that's about 50 feet, but different style. And that was nails for me. So this was going to be a hard style. It's on pockets. The worst hand injury I've ever had was 10 feet to the left of this on another rock climb, same style, also pockety, but 2 grades easier. So I was like, this would be a really cool project. And when writing out my quitting strategy, I anticipated that it was going to take me longer than normal to do all the moves, to do the bolt lengths, to get a 1 hang and a 2 hang. So I afforded that. And I was like, okay, like it's okay if I don't do all the, if I don't do all the bolt lengths until let's say day 4 or whatever. So I wrote out all the days. And my main concern when writing this was I didn't want to quit too early. I didn't want to go up it and on day 2 be like, nope, it's fucked. What's next? Like, is that
because that's kind of your normal go-to?
That is my default with this style of sport climb. If it was a big endurance route, I'm pretty good at seeing those through. If anything, I probably lean more on the other side. Like I know how to break down big endurance routes, but these short little bouldery things are hard for me. It's just something I need more time on, more experience on. And so my biggest fear was I would walk away too soon and not give myself a good chance.
Yeah.
So I weighted it accordingly as far as I was like, okay, I'm going to really slow play how long it takes me to get success. But if I can 1 hang it by my 3rd to last climbing day, I'm in. Like that was kind of the checkpoint for that, where maybe a bigger route, I would need more time. I would hope I would get to that sooner. Um, so yeah, went there. First 2 days, I hadn't climbed on limestone in a while, and it was pretty warm, but it was going to cool down. The weather was going to cool down. I was like, okay, cool, whatever. I'll go up it. Man, it was hard, but that's okay. I knew it was going to be hard. Then it snowed, and we
Weather
got,
cooled down a lot.
yeah, a little too much temps. And I was out of the Iris for 4 days. So half of my climbing days were now gone. And I still had a fun time. We went bouldering. Man, I had a blast. That was like one of my favorite bouldering days in years. Did an easy climbing day at Sinks. And then the temperatures rocketed right back up. Like my first day back to Wild Iris, I had to post hole for like an hour and a half just to get to the wall. As the snow was melting, there was a ton of humidity. The route felt heinous still. Yeah. And that's when I 100% normally would have quit. No question. I honestly normally would have quit when the snow came, which would have been acceptable. Like, hey,
totally.
Like, I'm going to go pick out maybe a 13 plus, something I can do in a few sessions, even if it's still this heinous style. And that'll be good. I'm going to get my safety send in, and we're going to call this a good trip. But I had my quitting strategy, and I was like, no, like, I'm going to see this through at least until one of these checkpoints doesn't come up. So I keep trying it. And on my third to last climbing day, I have this amazing breakthrough. And so the goal was to one hang this route, but I had this amazing breakthrough. Like it went from feeling absolutely nails to I had that moment of, oh, I can do this rock climb. Like, this is cool. Like I felt it, like finally unlocked the hard crux boulder that had been super heinous. Yeah. And it was cool. But at the same time, like I knew it was too late. Like my last 2 days were going to be even hotter. And I mean, even though it felt good, like I still knew that this was really hard and I didn't want to hang it. And this was the kind of thing, if I was halfway through the trip when that day happened, huge, man, that would have been like a mini celebration in its own. It's like, oh, I'm in the runnings. I can possibly do this. But it wasn't. It was at the end of the trip. And I was definitely a little bummed that day, but I kind of looked at the strategy and I was like, you know what? Like, I don't think sticking in it with it any longer would do me any good. It's going to get like 10 degrees hotter my last 2 days. This is already really hard. And it's pretty aggressive on my fingers. And the fact that I hurt myself on that wall before was still in my head. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to walk away from this and I'm going to go have fun. And so I climbed a bunch of new 512s that were cool. I sampled some new hard routes to try in the future. Man, I had a blast. And I didn't regret walking away from it. And honestly, once the trip was over, when I was kind of doing a post analysis, I was like, you know what? I stuck with it longer than I normally would have. And I had a huge breakthrough because of it. But I also think I didn't try it I think I quit at the right time. I didn't have the outcome I wanted, but in my mind, I made all the right decisions. And that's
yeah.
I
think what's important there, maybe the biggest part of it is that, you knew that your normal default was to quit early. You want to get those, what you called a safety send in.
Mm-hmm.
So you want the trip to be seen as successful in your eyes. Like I did something,
Yeah.
And you stretched that out a little bit. Like you pushed the boundaries of that a little bit. That's a little uncomfortable territory. I'm sure you're second guessing yourself in the middle of that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of you growing and being able to better understand that pressurized process, which is hugely important. And then you had already set up these checkpoints and you don't reach a checkpoint. So you're like, okay, now I can go do the thing that will help me feel good about this trip, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And I think we're all at different points on what helps us feel good about a trip or about a route, about a season, whatever it is. Do you think, had you continued on it, not quit, and still not sent, do you think you could have felt good about the trip still? Or at that time, did you need those days of less pressure, fun, all of that stuff to feel good about it?
I don't know. I kind of think I needed those days. Like, yeah.
It's important to know that, you know?
Yeah. Because that was like one of my few climbing trips of that year. And, if I'm completely honest, like, I didn't like this route was hard and it would have been cool to send, but it wasn't the most fun thing I've ever tried. Like,
for sure.
It goes like
100% not the most fun route.
Pretty gnarly, and it's, aggressive on the fingers. It's a little sharp in places and a little tweaky. It also goes into the sun midday, so you have to get up early. Like, I need to warm up thoroughly for that, like, heinous, like, mono pulling, like, tweaky pocket style. And it just felt more like work. Like, and I was down to put the work in on this thing. But yeah, once I tipped over that edge of like, this isn't it. For me, I don't think I would have continued having a good time. Like, I like climbing. Like, I had so much fun the next 2 days of just going out, climbing on new rocks and just getting to move and do enjoyable things. And I just don't think I would have had that. I wouldn't have gotten much joy out of continuing to try it, knowing that I probably wouldn't be back to try it again for maybe years. I don't know.
Yeah. I have a Wild Iris story as well that involves two kind of uses of a quitting strategy. And, just kind of quickly, I had trained the summer, or kind of like the late spring, early summer for Atomic Stetson, which was the route that you hurt your finger on.
Yeah.
And I showed up feeling ready, and day one on Atomic Stetson tweaked my finger and was like, oh man, this was my whole trip. This was the route I had planned to do. My quitting strategy was, I'm not quitting. I want to put all of my eggs in one basket. I want to see what that's like on a road trip. No safety sins. I'm just going to hammer away, and I'm going to be okay walking away with nothing to show for it. But day one, I tweaked my finger and realized I'm not willing to continue on this route and then hurt myself.
Yeah.
So I talked to BJ Tilden, and I was like, what's another 13C? I've never done 13C on the road. I would like to do that this trip. That's the goal. What's another 13C that won't tweak this finger? And he's like, well, there's this thing in the Sweat Lodge called Ghost Dance. So I immediately went there, started trying it, and final climbing day of the trip, we're leaving the next morning. I had fallen in the same spot over and over and over. I was bleeding. I had opened up my finger on this hold I kept falling off of, and I was done. And like feeling pretty disappointed, even though I had done exactly what I planned to do, like keep hammering away. I felt disappointed because I had gotten close and couldn't put it together. And Annalisa was like, no, you have to go up again. Like, you have to try this again. We're here. It's the last day. You've got time. I don't give a fuck if you have the energy or not. You have to try. And I was like, all right. So I tried one more time and I did the route.
Oh, man.
It's that classic, like, expectations were lost and suddenly I was able to do it. But I think the key there was, I quit on Stetson because I'm not willing to get injured. I know that's if I can help it, I'm going to avoid injury at all cost.
Yeah.
So for me, that's a no-brainer quitting strategy. If it feels like it's going to hurt me, I'm done. I have no interest.
Yeah, and that's a good one. Pretty much everyone should employ.
Yeah. And there are times where I'll push the line a little bit. I really want to do this thing. I think I can get away with it without getting injured if I'm smart and I take enough rest days and I
Yeah.
don't do this move too many times in a day. I'll push that line, but that's a decision I make beforehand. And then I had made the decision. I'm not quitting on this thing. I'm going to see what happens. My goal isn't to send. My goal is to go there, do a whole trip, trying one route that's really hard for me because I want to find out where my limits are.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part where we get stuck. The goal wasn't to send. So even had I not sent, the trip would have been a success because I had done what I set out to do. But you have to decide that beforehand, otherwise you leave yourself open to saying, what if, and maybe, the whole, let's just see thing. And then you leave it open to quitting too early, to going for way too long and then feeling disappointed. So the quitting strategy, whatever it is, sometimes the quitting strategy can be not quitting, for this amount of time. I think it's super important to have.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think I think you made a really good point. Like in you saying that even had you not sent, you would have still been happy because you kind of stuck with the goal and the intention.
Yeah. I might have felt disappointed in the moment,
which you should,
but by the time I got home, I would have been like, oh, I did exactly what I planned to do. So.
Yeah. And it makes me think more about the question you asked me on would I have been could I have still had a good trip had I continued trying the route? And I think it's hard saying without knowing, but I think I probably could have. Because really to me, the trip was a success when I pushed past my goal was to just push past that initial urge of, hey, this is too hard, quit. Like with a short bouldery sport climb. And I did. Yeah. And I pushed past for a few extra days and I had like this kind of rad breakthrough. And so for me, it kind of capped off in a nice way. And I got to still, have my enjoyment afterwards. And I think I could have still like climbed on it another 2 days. It may not have been as fun, but I think I definitely still in retrospect would have looked back and said, hey, this is success though. Like our intention was to keep trying. I can't my goal on trips shouldn't be to send something. It should be to give myself the best opportunity to send things. Like that's within my control. Clearly I can't control that it snowed for 4 days in Wild Iris. Right. Like I couldn't control that it got unseasonably hot right after. These are without.
You also couldn't control that it's more fun to go bouldering.
Oh, definitely can't control that. No chance. We went out. I was like, am I a boulderer? Is this every time I go bouldering? I'm like, I think I'm just a boulderer. Like, I don't know why I keep trying to tell myself I sport climb.
Yeah. Blake was trying to get me to go sport climbing the other day. And I'm like, you know what? I might go do it. There's that one bouldery route up at Wolf Point I want to try. I might go do it. And then I went bouldering that afternoon and I was like, nah, I'm just going to go bouldering.
Yeah. Just pulled my truck up right next to the boulder.
Exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, so
do you think in future trips you're going to continue like writing out your quitting strategy?
So I think it's helpful to write it out. At the very least, for me, I think it's important to share with my partner. Just so that, because that's huge. Like, regardless of what's in a notebook, I can ignore a notebook pretty well. Pretty good at that.
Yeah, me too.
But it's like, you having Annalisa there to be like, no, we're here. You're tying in and I'm going to belay you. Like, you're going to give this a go.
This isn't what you said you were going to do.
Exactly. Yeah. You're like, Annalisa, I'm bleeding from 4 fingers. Well, you got 10. Like, that's the kind of partners we need.
Pretty good ratio.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a good ratio. Exactly. Like, so communicating that with my partner and saying, hey, these are my intentions. Like, no matter what I say, down the road. No matter, this can even be the morning of, no matter what I say today at 3 p.m. when I come off that route for the first time, tell me I need to go up it twice. Like, that's what I need.
Yep.
Things like that, like communicating that with my partner, even if it's not on paper, for me is huge, because, that's what partners are there for. Like, we're there to hold each other accountable in the best way possible.
Totally. And use your partners that way, and make sure they're using you that way. That's huge. Last thing from me, I believe in the power of words. I hugely believe in the power of words, and I know that quitting can be a really negative, have a negative connotation for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So if calling it strategic quitting feels bad for you, if that makes you still feel like you did something wrong, this could very easily just be called, try new things strategies, or do something different strategy, or whatever. It doesn't have to be framed as quitting. I personally really enjoy the challenge of taking back words and, reframing words for myself. So I like the idea of using quitting as a positive force.
Same.
But if you don't reframe it with some different words, it's still the same tactic. It's still the same strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Like, and, for me, that's what's kind of funny. I think that's why I had such a hard time explaining it to people. Because for me, my quitting strategy is really a stick with it strategy. Like, let's push quitting further down the road. But like you, I mean,
there's these phrases like quitters never win, winners never quit. That's bullshit.
Yeah,
that's not true at all.
Exactly. It sounds good until you think about it.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, let's look at Michael Jordan. Did Michael Jordan continue practicing in the exact same way he always had? No, he quit some things. He tried new things. When Michael Jordan was Offensive Player of the Year and people were criticizing his defense, he quit playing defense the way that he always had, and he leveled up. He did a new thing, and he became Defensive Player of the Year the next season. Quitting doesn't have to be this super negative thing. Strategically quitting can be a huge tactical positive.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think it's such a beneficial idea. And like you, I really like the idea of trying to take back this word of, of saying like, hey, this is okay. Like, quitting can be useful. It's the same thing, like embrace, like, I think the word failure is the same.
Totally.
Yeah, if you're not, people say it all the time. Like, if you're not failing, you're not learning. Like, and that's definitely true with rock climbing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Anything else from you on this?
No, not that I can think of, but, if any of y'all decide to employ a quitting strategy, or if you think of another good one that we didn't mention, man, shoot us a message, post about it, tag us. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about it.
Yeah, tag us on the Instagrams with your quitting strategies. Let's take that word back. Let's celebrate quitting when it's a smart thing to do. I'm all about it. I'll post some. I'll share your posts and put some rockets and fireworks emojis on there.
Boom.
All about it. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this thing, this is a patron episode that you're getting to hear as a bonus. If you're listening on the regular Power Company podcast or on the YouTubes, the patron episodes usually are just available to the patrons on the We Scream Like Eagles podcast. And you can become a patron at patreon.com/Power Company podcast. Or right there in the show notes in your pocket supercomputer, or if you're watching on the YouTube, it's down there in the description. Click that link, become a patron. $1 a month is the minimum. That's easy to do, and you get two extra board meetings or some other episode, 2 extra episodes every month. So check that out. We would appreciate it. Let's just grow this community. I love the direction it's going.
Same.
More and more. I feel like it's going in a really great direction. So we hope you'll be part of it. In the meantime, you know where to find us, powercompanyclimbing.com. You can find us at Power Company Climbing on the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the YouTubes, the Pinterests, the TikTok. We're not actually on TikTok. My daughter would kill me if I was on TikTok. And we are also not on the Twitter because, like my dude Nolly Simon says,
we don't tweet, we scream like eagles.
This time